name is Peter Loge. I'm the director of the School of Media. Half a clap, thank you. Either all at once or not at all, really. I'm the director of the School of Media and Public Affairs. Welcome to Jack Morton Auditorium, or welcome back to Jack Morton Auditorium to some of you. A couple of alumni in the room. I am really excited to be moderating this sixth in a series of 6 events we're co-hosting with the campaigns and elections this year. It's a new partnership which we bring together bipartisan consultants, Democratic and Republican consultants, students and professors to talk about the theory and practice of political campaigns in America in 2023, 24, and hopefully beyond. This year we've talked to some really interesting people about AI, ethics, what field and campaigns look like in 2024, relationships between the press and campaigns, and a range of issues. Tonight we're going to be wrapping up this year's series, talking about influencers. As a reminder, we're live streaming, so hello to everybody out there in CNE live stream land. This is going to live on SMPA's website, so there'll be lots of opportunities to revisit these conversations. So and afterwards I'm going to have some thank yous, and we're all going to go upstairs and have Andy's Pizza to celebrate if you're successfully getting through this, because this is college and we just feed you pizza to get you to come to things. So that's why the faculty show up. I'm excited for this evening's panel. It should be really interesting. I'm just going to go down the line, starting with Madeline Toomey, who some of you may recognize from the halls of SMPA. Madeline is a digital strategist, founder and president of Rufus in Maine. Spent 6 years at Bully Pulpit Interactive, where she managed the $100 million in advertising spent on behalf of the Obama 2012 campaign, raised millions of dollars for progressive organizations through donor acquisition, helped defend the Affordable Care Act, was a key staff member of the growing firm, worked in the Biden campaign in 2020 to use the power of influencer marketing to bring the campaign over the finish line. And I love this story, even though you may not. And it's good. So Madeline's a student of mine, but she was also a student of a guy named Professor Jason Oster. And she took digital media from Jason. And as I recall, you said you weren't sure what you wanted to do about politics or your career until you took Jason's class, decided that digital media was going to be what she wanted to do for her living, came back, has become one of the top Democratic digital strategists, and came back as an adjunct a couple of years ago and actually taught the class that defined her career, which I think is super cool. So thank you.
All true.
All true. That's good news. I do run the ethics project, so that's good news. Next to her is Nicholas Anastasio, double majoring in political communication and data science, graduating in how many days?
Probably about a month.
Probably about a month. Yes, that is true, yes. Yes, I'm sure. Working at the intersection of data, politics, and journalism, covering political data and elections at CNN, NBC News, and C-SPAN. And we did the prep call. You were at CNN, right? You're doing data for CNN.
Yes, they're polling and election analytics.
There you go. Next is Liz Ring, currently at Direct Persuasion, where she started her career as a junior analyst and is now director of performance marketing. Prior to Direct Persuasion, you interned for Tom Keene for Congress, and Direct Persuasion is one of the leading Republican firms in town, and worked your way up, which is pretty cool. So you stick with it, you work up, which is a great good thing. And finally, only in order along the line, Sonia Howell, a political communications major, graduating in 2026. Member of the Association of Black Journalists here at GW, a terrific and important organization. And you also have a podcast with Nyla Moxley on WRGW, college radio, titled Women versus Thought, which is about navigating higher education as Black women and creating safe space for Black women navigating their 20s. So welcome, all of you, and thank you for joining. Thank you all for joining us. All right, so tonight's conversation, as advertised, I know because I have the advertisement in front of me, is politics in its influencer era, how digital creators are changing the future of political marketing. And I want to focus a lot of tonight's conversation on influencers. We hear a lot about influencers, influencer marketing, and what that means in 2024. What I want to start with is a definition of an influencer versus a micro-influencer versus just an endorsement. What are these things? Liz, why don't you start us off? How do you define these terms?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me. So when we think about an influencer, we think about someone who has a large following and that following is highly engaged. So usually there's a niche topic, interest, whether it's cooking, sports, politics, that the influencer has all their following, and that's how they built it up. So looking at that is different than just a celebrity endorsement. A celebrity didn't get their following from social media. Celebrity being someone like Taylor Swift, influencer being someone like Alex Earl. So that's kind of how we differentiate those two, and then looking at a micro-influencer versus an influencer. So again, that influencer has a large following, and that following is highly engaged. A micro-influencer has a smaller following, but that following is still very engaged. So anyone can really be a micro-influencer. A micro-influencer could be someone who's posting in the local community moms page all the time, and all of her neighbors know her, and she's getting more likes and comments and engagement than maybe her neighbors. While obviously we know an influencer to be someone with like a bigger name ID, like the Alex Earl example.
So you led influencer campaigns. Does this all sound about right? Is this how you define it as well?
Yeah. Yeah, that's about right. Nothing to add. That was perfect.
It'll be a fun conversation this evening. Now, you guys are, presumably influencers are largely, when I think about influencers, I think about targeting college students and more younger voters. Are you an influencer, and who do you follow if you're not an influencer?
I'm
You have a-
definitely not an influencer.
Okay.
But in terms of influencers I follow, one big person comes to mind, but I guess she's not really political. I think this is something we touched on before, but Victoria Paris, like she's like a huge influencer for our generation. Like she inspires like a lot of like fashion and then in the beginning she talked a lot about politics. And yeah, like another influencer I can think of, like we said, Alex Earl is a big one. But yeah, like they border on the line of like doing some sort of marketing, but also kind of being towards politics, especially like inspiring people to vote out there in elections, but not really swaying towards either side. But yeah.
Nicholas, how about you? Are you an influencer, and if not, who do you follow?
I'm not an influencer by any means. But I would say like a lot of the, like similar to Sonia, like a lot of the influencers that I followed, like, because like for me, TikTok, I started with it like when I was a senior in high school. And so that was like prior to the 2020 election. So a lot of times influencers were talking about like thoughts, like they were just like spewing their thoughts on the internet, or they had like a little topic that they were focused on, whether that was cooking or like fashion. And then like as political topics were becoming more relevant because of the 2020 election, that's when they started to like show their political views, start leaning into that and trying to get their own followers to support political campaigns, political issues. So I think definitely it follows a similar line of you follow the topic and the topic leads you to that sort of political content and messaging.
Interesting. So I want to come back to that political piece in a minute, but I want to start with something you said, Liz, which is engagement, right? Because typically when we talk about social media metrics, it's followers. But it feels like with influencers, you're actually, it's not number of followers, it's level of engagement. So how are you, as somebody who does the influencer campaigns for a living, how do you talk about the importance of engagement, how you measure engagement, and how that's different than just followers?
Yeah, so I feel like you went back to 2020 and early TikTok, so I will too. TikTok has really changed social media, and I know that you all know this, but social media used to be so follower driven because you needed a following in order to get any amount of likes and comments and posts or on your posts. And now what TikTok has done is it's changed all of social media. Now we have this For You page where content is served to you whether or not you opt into that person. YouTube Shorts does this, Instagram Reels does this, and essentially every other social media platform is copying this too. So now you can get a ton of views, you can get a ton of likes and comments without really having any followers. So followers has become a little bit less relevant in terms of how we look at creators or influencers. So we definitely want to see high engagement rate. Are people commenting, liking, sharing, saving, etc. But I also look a lot at views, right? A lot of this content is video driven. And so we want to see that creator is driving views. So really, essentially, you don't have to be an influencer to get views. But I think the way that I think about what an influencer is, like, I'm not an influencer in the sense, in the way that we are talking about influencers, because I don't create content thinking that I'm ever going to make money. And I think even if there's like a 16-year-old in her high school posting, she might be an influencer because she's still she might be gearing up towards making money, even if she's not making money right then.
So being an influencer then it's not about just engagement, but it's also then turning that into profit.
That's how I think of it, yeah.
So if people do what you say, they turn out to vote, or they vote for your candidate or whatever, but they're not getting paid for it, are they not an influencer?
But they're probably getting paid in other ways.
How so? What do you mean?
Maybe not from a political organization, but from, Blue Apron or something like that. Or maybe they're getting paid to speak. I mean, a lot of influencers make money beyond their social media as well.
Okay.
That might be the way in which they became famous. but they probably do speaking fees or have merchandise, et cetera.
Interesting. So Sonia, you're not an influencer, but there are people you follow. Do you engage with people you follow?
Yeah, I try to, you know. I love like sharing, obviously like everybody shares videos and stuff from TikTok. And then like reposting on your stories and stuff like that about things that you find interesting, you find important, especially like around the 2020 election. I feel like everybody was reposting something that was important information, things needed to know. But yeah, like sharing, commenting, liking, anything like that is like great engagement for those types of influencers. So.
What makes you engage with content?
I think if you gain a strong emotion from me, like, you know, obviously not everything is going to be super interesting all the time, but if you can like pique my interest in some sort of like emotional way, if it's going to make me angry, happy, you know, like laugh, you know, like gaining some sort of emotional reaction from people, I notice like definitely drives up engagement, especially with commenting. Like people feel the need to express how they feel in the comments about whatever you're saying, positive or negative.
So Liz, how do you create content that engages people like Sonia?
I think the biggest thing for us when we look at it in politics is we want influencers to create content that is native, it feels organic to the content that they already create. So we don't want it to be a replica of a campaign ad that we could post ourselves on Facebook. We want it to be in the influencer's point of view, so that way it will come across to the audience as more credible, and you know the influencer really believes this and these are their beliefs, and it's in their native language, if you will.
So this gets to a bit of an ethical question then. So if you're feeding influencers content, do you have to reveal that you're feeding them content, or does it just sort of show up?
Yeah, so I think it's always best practice any time that we're, you know, paying an influencer or anything that it's noted that it's sponsored content. There's disclaimers, both written and verbal, in there for sure.
Makes sense. Nicholas, how do you engage with content? What makes you engage?
Usually I'm engaged when, because like for me, I also like to consume journalistic content on social media, but definitely when someone is definitely using similar, like for say, if like it's videos or graphics, they're using those types of techniques where they're trying to add some quality to what they're doing. Some of the good things about influencers is that obviously they can have a personality that like rings true and it helps convey their message better than say a journalist might. So in many ways it's the aesthetics of the content where they're really taking into account like the quality of the content so that people are paying a lot more attention to it. And for that, that's gonna allow me to like it a little bit more or bookmark it for later to check into it, especially because for a lot of influencers, they don't necessarily have like a fact check team or like an ethics team. So they're going to run with a topic, run with breaking news, and they're just going to post the video immediately before some journalism organizations are going to even get theirs to post.
So this is a very data analytic, double major in political communication data sort of an answer, right? You're going to save it, you're aesthetically viewing it. But Sonia like gets engaged because something makes her angry or happy, or do you engage content that way, or do you always have sort of the journalistic data eye on social media?
I usually don't, like I guess for journalism's sake, I don't like to like a lot of things because I think there is that, with social media, there is sort of that digital footprint of like your likes, your shares. So for me, like I'm pretty reserved when it comes to liking things, but I will say that like if it's something that's not necessarily on the market or something that is really being said by an influencer that no one else is saying at the time, that might get me to engage with it more when they're adding something different to the conversation.
Makes sense. How do you get people to engage with content, Madeline?
I think much like Liz, it's so important that it feels authentic to that person. And I think we've probably all seen influencers or creators who make ads and you're just like skip right over it because you can tell it's an ad. And not just because it's disclosed, but it just doesn't feel like them, or it feels like maybe more boring. And so we encourage the creators that we work with to really, again, make content that feels authentic to them. And sometimes you have to remind them what that looks like too. If they always start their post with like, this is for the girls and the girls only, like they should start the ad with that exact same line, right? Like it should really feel like a native piece of content. It shouldn't feel like a talking point. So sometimes it comes down to like production quality as well, and like the editing of the actual piece of content.
So this is the aesthetics end of the panel. That's the just engagement end of the panel, apparently. So something that a number of you have said that sounds very old. A lot of this is new media. We're engaging differently. Campaigns look very different today than they did when I was coming up. But the idea that you have to sound authentic is Aristotelian, right? I have to do the Aristotle name check in this, right? But it's whether or not your audience views you as a person of character, whether or not they sound and feel like you do. So it's that authenticity that sounds is really critical to an influencer. Do you just assume that authenticity is real, or is that sort of a faked thing on a campaign? Do you have to tell the candidate, look, I need you to sound like this kind of a person, play this role, or does it only work if the candidate really is that person?
So you're talking more the candidate?
The
than
candidate or any of the
influencer?
other influencers. Like, how do you make something sound authentic and real?
Yeah, I mean, I think we always encourage, like, whether it's an influencer or like a candidate that we're working with, to like sound like themselves. So if they want to, film a video going through the drive-through, because that's like what they do, like go for it, and want it to be as authentic to them as possible, and try to prevent giving like talking points that they're just regurgitating.
Can you tell the difference between talking points and authentic? How do you know that you're responding to authentic content and not some very clever marketing scheme?
I think obviously, if I've been watching that person for a long time, you can see like over a time progression, whether that person has kind of had some sort of coaching about like within their content. Like obviously people change over time, but influencers in particular definitely change a lot from the moment they are not famous to now when they're like all over the internet. They definitely, you can tell their authenticity has changed a lot, especially when there's a lot of money in the game. Like they are definitely, their authenticity I feel goes down. So I take it with a grain of salt, honestly.
So does that mean interesting, so the more popular an influencer becomes, ironically, the risk is they actually become less of an influencer because they're not
Yes.
authentic. Mm-hmm. The old joke that acting is easy, sincerity is hard. If you can fake sincerity, you've got it made. That's what it sounds like. How do you make sure content sounds authentic?
I think whenever we're working with influencers, we're not like giving them, we're giving them very as vague as possible talking points, and more or less trying to say these are messages that like we want you to stay away from, but you can do whatever in this domain, to kind of allow them to do exactly that. And we have that, I feel that's pretty well received. The influencers like that. They like being able to kind of take their own lead with it.
So is that what so you find somebody who's an influencer and you want them to push a political message, but it can't sound like a political message because then you lose how do you do that?
Yeah, well, I think what's interesting about working with creators is like they have the same incentives as we do. Like we want them to sound authentic, but they want to be authentic too. Like they want the content to perform. That's the only way that they can continue to like make a living off of it. So everyone has the same goals, which I think is really helpful. And much like Liz, if we're working with someone on a climate campaign, usually we're just saying like, here are some main statistics about the Inflation Reduction Act that we, like if this is helpful. And they might specifically say, well, I'm really interested in talking about the Climate Corps. And we're like, great, here's 5 things on the Climate Corps. So it's really more like being almost like a back of house researcher than really anything else. And just being able to like give what they want to talk about authentically, like being that assistant, really.
Does that then help you, both aesthetically and as a journalist, discern good content from bad, this sort of, if it sounds or feels authentic?
I think like the authenticity has always been like a major talking point, whether that's like for broadcast media especially, but I think with authenticity, like it does come out a lot easier with some influencers, especially when you're seeing them at a point where they don't have a lot of followers and they don't have a lot of engagement. And as they're becoming popular, you can kind of discern if they've kept that mantra, like if they've kept that going, or if that's changed as they've become a lot more popular. And I think a politician like coming out of the woodwork, you're only seeing them in like a campaign ad or in like a media interview. But with some of these influencers where they're starting somewhat from the bottom up, you can sort of see that trajectory over time. And I think for a lot of people, that's why it makes it so easy for them to trust what they're saying or rely on that messaging.
Interesting. So you raise another question is how you pick what influencers you want to pitch, right? Because part of being part of the power of, I would think, influencers is just another political ad, but this is content I'm consuming anyway that is now talking about climate or taxes or immigration or whatever. But now you're invading political messages into non-political space, right? So if I'm consuming political news, if I'm working at CNN, I'm thinking sort of with my news hat on, but if I'm watching, soccer or something, I'm not thinking news, maybe my filters are down. How do you match non-political influencers with political content?
It's really hard.
Thank you all for coming so much today. It's been a terrific conversation.
Well, by definition, I mean, if that person doesn't want to talk about politics, they don't want to talk about politics.
Do you pitch them though? Do you go to a popular influencer and say, hey, you got a
Yes.
cooking show? Oh, let's talk about the impact of climate on food. Here's some climate talking
Yes,
points.
and we get a lot of no's. I think half of this business is getting a lot of no's, honestly. And that's true whether or not you work in politics. These people just get so many inbound requests every single day. So you're just really fighting for inbox space half the time. But a lot of people turn us down. The people who want to talk about social justice issues or progressive issues are the ones that end up wanting to work with us. But, oftentimes it's people who maybe talk about the news or talk about politics, but sometimes it is people who, the 99% of their content's lifestyle or comedy or fashion, and then just that 1%, they'll talk about things that really matter to them. And that's kind of like the perfect kind of creator that we want to work with.
Liz, do people come to you and say, I'm an influencer in food or fashion or comedy, but I also believe in, Senator Cassidy or Senator Kennedy or whomever? Do they come to you, or do you go find them, or both?
I would say both for sure. So we definitely, a lot of the influencers that we'll engage with are, talk a lot about news, politics, all of those things, but we'll also work with influencers that maybe, like Madeline mentioned, that like 1% is talking about politics and they feel really passionate about a certain campaign, so they want to, use their platform to spread that message. So we'll work with them as well.
How do you make sure that the content matches the influencer, right? So I can imagine some influencers might want to come to you, or some candidates will come to you and say, hey, I want this fashion influencer my kid follows, get my talking point to that person. How do you make sure it's like a natural fit, so you don't have Sonia going, what happened? Like, I was with you, but you've obviously sold out, and Nicholas is just like not even bothering to track your fact check. How do you make sure it matches?
Yeah, we're not making the content for the influencers. So we're giving the influencers like some top line points of like these are the topics that the campaign's really focused on, how they want to kind of match that into their content. We leave up to them. Because we want, again, them to do it in that way that feels the most authentic to their audience. So we're not saying like, you need to post this caption and like, here's what you need to talk about in the video. We leave it up to them.
So I want to shift gears a little bit now, because campaigns are outcome driven, right? First Tuesday after the first Monday in November, you win or you don't. How do you know that this is working? Like, you're getting lots of engagement, but how do you know that engagement's turning into votes or mobilization or donations or anything? How do you track this?
We're really just asking the hard questions.
But you went to SMPA, so I'm assuming you can handle them.
Yeah, sometimes you don't know. I mean, I've done a lot of influencer campaigns with like nonprofits that sometimes are action driven. So maybe it's not, voting, but it might be petition signatures or calls to Congress in support of legislation. And so in that way, you can track the success of that, right? I did a program with a nonprofit that was trying to get a visa for someone, and we got 150,000 signatures in 48 hours, and there was no other promotion of that petition. So in those, and I think we got like 1.5 million views on our videos. So in that case, it's like very easy to see the impact of your work, but sometimes it's much harder. And that's true of any persuasion advertising, right? Things that don't have that direct action tied to them online. So like every TV ad that you put out there, there are ways that we can guess if those are impactful through polling and things like that, but you never really know, and that's kind of true with a lot of the work that we do as well.
Yeah, I mean, Hal Malchow, who helped reinvent direct mail, points this out, and his new book points out how we often do, those of us who work in politics often just do the obvious thing that's all obviously wrong most of the time.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is, I think the impact, it's so obvious to see the impact of TikTok and the impact of certain high profile influencers that I think it would be silly to not utilize them in this election cycle, and silly to to opt out. So obviously we encourage everyone to opt in.
Opt in. Have you ever done something based on what an influencer suggested? No, I'm not going to say told you to do, but have you acted on an influencer's influence, I guess?
Not really.
Not really? You too busy fact checking it?
I mean, most of the time, like with influencers, they're kind of saying what's probably already in the news. Like something that will be very common is like there'll be like a green screen background, and it's like an article that's already been written, and they're just talking like in front of it. So oftentimes, like the information's already out there, it's already been talked about, and also I think a lot of the issues that get talked about might not be like super hyper local, unless like you're in that like hyper local community on social media. And I think oftentimes when it comes to campaigning, like your local in-person canvassing is still going to reign supreme, especially when it comes to local elections.
See, to me that sounds like micro-influencers, right? It's the, as you said, it's the mom in the neighborhood with not so many followers, but they're all deeply engaged in that. So it sounds like, from what you just said and what you said earlier, a micro-influencer is kind of neighbor to neighbor, knocking on door stuff. So would you, if you followed I don't know, somebody in SMPA or somebody in your hometown, might you act on what they said, even if they're not hugely popular, but because they feel like they're familiar or from the same area or from the same community as you?
I mean, I think with social media, it would make it a lot easier for me to get connected with any of the issues, and would definitely allow me to like stay more in tune with what's going on, especially if, you know, that micro-influencer, for instance, would organize a local campaign in the community, and they would like organize something that might not otherwise be done because local journalism isn't as abundant anymore. So somewhat social media can replace that.
Makes sense. So Sonia, have you ever have you been influenced, not even necessarily in politics, but in?
Well, yeah, like
Okay.
outside of politics. Yeah, like like places to buy clothes, you know, like certain things like that. Like fashion is like something I'm super engaged on social media. So like anywhere that you can find something cute, or like, you know, automatically like I'm already adding that to like my Pinterest or whatever. And Pinterest is like a huge social platform for my generation. So I engage in stuff like that. But for politics, I mean, not really, because like he said, like I am quick to pull up Google and like search if that's actually true, like what they're saying, because they really are just like reporting on something that's already been talked about, but like maybe the whole of their followers are not really engaging on like actual news organizations like how we are. Like that's something very specific to us. But yeah, so like for politics, not really, but for other stuff, yes, absolutely.
It does seem a little unfair to ask SMPA students to stand in for all of America when you're, by definition, atypical. I want to, all of you have raised an interesting point that I want to shift to a little bit, and that's away from politics and more towards other social issues. One of the complaints about TikTok and other social media is it's all a sea of nonsense and garbage, and people have no idea what they're talking about. It's just spewing nonsense. We should fact check it and push back on it and say this is awful. The Harvard Chan School of Public Health last year brought together the top TikTok mental health influencers, most of whom are not mental health experts at all, brought them to Cambridge. The team identified 100 social media influencers producing quality work with broad reach. They brought 25 were invited to virtual forums, provided with a Slack, and invited to attend an August summit, at which Harvard Chan School of Public Health faculty provided good information on mental health practices. They weren't saying read this script or do this thing, but they're saying, hey, if you're going to talk about mental health, here's what we know works, here's some good things and bad things. The researchers found that 42 influencers received digital toolkits were 3% more likely to post evidence-based content, which meant that content was viewed 800,000 times, far wider reach than a typical study would get. So 3% isn't a lot, but 800,000 is. So is this a good way to use, it sounds like this could be a good way to use influencers, is you get them to push content, but the study also found that that was also the least viewed content on the influencers' sites. How do you, if you're working on a social issue campaign like mental health resources, how do you navigate that? How do you make sure you're getting people to provide good information and compelling information? Or do you just give up because you know what, it's TikTok, don't even worry about it? What would you do, Liz, if somebody came to you and said, we want to promote I don't know, public health or quitting smoking or something.
Yeah, I think making sure like having all of that, those like facts, and making sure that those types of campaigns are fact driven and have content that's really going to engage the audience for sure, would be like a good, definitely.
So is this a good trend that people like School of Public Health are reaching out to TikTok influencers?
I think so, yes. I actually worked with like a nonpartisan public health foundation and did kind of not as like intense research as that. I would say it was like research, that kind of research. And the question they were asking was like, should we teach our fellows, our public health fellows, to become better at creating social media content, or should we find people on social media who are already talking about public health and like share our studies with them? And like we landed in the latter place because that's actually a lower barrier than it is to teach, you know, a 50-year-old, no offense, 50-year-old public health fellow
Careful here, Madeline.
how to use TikTok. So yeah, I think in a perfect world, those public health fellows like would be on TikTok, but a lot of them aren't.
But don't you risk oversimplifying really complicated issues by passing it off to TikTok?
Sure, but that's what public communicators do. I mean, we're always doing that, right? I think that's important to make information accessible.
So you're consuming this information. Do you know that what you're seeing may not be completely accurate, but it's better than nothing? Or like as a consumer, how do you feel about this?
I think it's a starting point. Like, I think that type of content in particular is trying to inspire people to research further. Obviously, like piquing people's interest. Like, especially TikTok, like people can make like series on like whole topics and people will follow it. So yeah, like I think it's more so better to pique people's interest than rather than like give them like a whole rundown, because no one's gonna watch that. Like most people, like I know on TikTok in order to like have it monetized, it has to be a minute, but most people I'm sure are not watching the full minute. They're just getting whatever soundbite sounds good or like what's going to get them to engage right away, but not really follow all of the information. So I think it can be a good thing or a bad thing in that situation, but yeah.
So what do you think, Nicholas? You're the fact-checking, thoughtful social media consumer. Is what Harvard's trying to do good or bad because it's diminishing, maybe they're giving bad information? Should we only have good trained public health professionals talking about public health? What do you think?
I think it's a situation of like, it goes back to like our discussion on authenticity, because I think when you're discussing more accurate information, I think that's good for everybody, but especially for followers, they might be following a particular person because they think that they have these views themselves and that they're doing their own independent research, they're doing their own like independent discussions around these topics, and if they're hearing that, oh, this particular firm is giving them this information or this particular organization, they might feel like, well, I don't feel like this is a personal or like a personal parasocial relationship anymore, and now we're involving like bigger people in the conversation. It's not just my favorite influencer that I like trust with all the opinions, and now it's become, oh, they have some type of backing behind them. So I think in the sense of discussion, it can lessen the fact checks, but I think it's a gray area as to whether like followers will continue to trust these influencers going forward if it seems like it's less personal and now more backed up.
Interesting. See, you used a really important phrase there, parasocial relationships. And the idea from media theory is, I'm not just a viewer, I know you and I'm your friend. Even if I only ever see you on social media, you have no idea who I am, but I feel like I know you because you let me into your life somehow and I trust you. So you actually create an interpersonal relationship, which is how you build the trust. And the talking points might feel like a betrayal of trust and I'll turn on you, but it's this engagement, right? Which is again where we started the conversation. Is engagement equal across platforms, or is this, I hear a lot of TikTok talk, but with one Pinterest name check. But what about other platforms, Twitter/X, Facebook, Insta, whatever? Is that, do you develop the same kind of relationship there, or is this a TikTok thing?
No, definitely. I think it's all similar. I mean, Facebook has its own influencers too. I think the demographics of people who are on Facebook and spending time there are like the demographics of every platform are slightly different, but the idea that there are influencers there and the parasocial relationships that people create are also there too. absolutely.
So similarly, do you match influencers with platforms or audience? How do you segment who you need to influence, who's doing the influencing, and the platform?
Yeah, so I think when we think influencers, we're matching them for their audience. So each influencer has a unique audience, and then within that, the influencer's audience on Facebook may be a little bit different than Instagram, TikTok, etc. So making sure that we're matching the influencer both to what platform they're posting and having them post across different platforms to kind of expand that reach even more, and then making sure that we're choosing influencers that align with what audience we want to reach.
Then you want to have the conversation, right? So on Facebook, it's in the comment section, and does your influencer then engage the conversation as it goes? Like, how do you make it a two-way, I don't want to say relationship, how do you make it feel like an honest two-way relationship?
Yeah, so we want the influencers obviously to engage with the audience, whether that's like in the comments, people DMing influencers and being responsive. I think that's how all these influencers have built their followings up. So obviously we promote that, and that's always encouraged.
And do you feel as if you sort of know the influencers you're following? Like, not in a real way, the way you know your friends, but you feel a bit of a connection?
I don't know, because I think of it differently.
Okay,
like,
good.
I try not to, like, because I really don't know that person, you know what I'm saying? Like, I know, like, I get really into, like, the whole thing of marketing. Like, I know that they're always trying to sell me something, and I'm not an easily sold person. So, you know, like, I try not to think of it that way. You know, like, I think of having a relationship of, like, oh, I know you're good at suggesting certain things towards me and I can trust your opinion, but not more so that we're like friends. Like, I know some people really get into it and feel like they know this person intimately and they know every part of their life, and I don't really feel that way because I know everybody's different behind closed doors. So.
This is a very sophisticated panel. I love this. I want to change gears a little bit to something you talked about earlier or in a previous conversation we had. So you're trying to get influencers to help promote your clients, but also turn your clients into influencers. How do you do that?
Yeah, so I think for some of our clients, it's being able to use, you know, if they're themselves have large followings and have kind of built themselves up, looking at how they want to use their political capital to, you know, promote whether it's their colleagues in the House or other, you know, people that are running for election, and how they can use their own followings and their own brands that they built up to have influence in those elections or help boost their colleagues. So we see that a lot of being able to help our clients, you know, use that political capital in that way as well and help build relationships amongst members.
Elected officials and candidates are not notoriously tech savvy. Do you make sure that your candidate or client is actually doing the tech, or do you just make sure they're sort of informing the member of your team who's doing the tech for them?
Yeah, I think it depends. Some clients I would say are way more hands-on than others. So definitely working with the client themselves, but then also their team as well, to make sure everyone's on the same page. So.
Is that an authentic relationship then, if the staffer's doing the social media posting?
Of course, yeah. I mean,
Again, thank you for coming.
Yeah, no, it is, I mean, it depends on the candidate, to Liz's point, or the public official. Like AOC does her own TikToks. Jeff Jackson does his own TikToks. I've talked to Jeff Jackson about how he creates TikToks, and it's fascinating. The way he speaks is exactly like speaking to like mainstream creators I've spoken to about how he thinks about his craft, and he does it himself. But I've also produced TikToks with Barack Obama. Like, that doesn't mean that Barack Obama doesn't care about getting out the vote on TikTok. Of course he does. And a lot of what public officials and candidates do, like they have scripts, they have talking points. I think it's like a little naive to think that that doesn't always follow through on social media too.
So what do you think? Did you just assume the people you're following on social media might be coached or scripted, and it might not actually be that person doing the whole thing?
I mean, I think it depends. I think with AOC, like, she was on TikTok, I think, before a lot of other US representatives were. So when you were hearing her talk, she's just holding it in the phone. It's like in the selfie position. Like, she's talking the same way she would talk to potentially constituent or even to a reporter. With Jeff Jackson, though, I feel like his are a lot more like he took some time to think about what he was going to say beforehand.
Yeah.
Like, the camera is already positioned. It's not necessarily handheld. So,
And he does script them, but like he
Yeah.
writes it.
but yeah, so for that, I think that's where the thought comes into play. It's less, it might come off less natural, but it is still prepared in a way that he wants to make sure that he's conveying his message, but conveying it in a proper and organized way. But for that, I think a lot of people, when you're in a certain position as elected official, that's kind of what you want. You want elected officials to sound proper, have organized thoughts, be able to communicate their message in a concise way instead of sort of jumbling for like the next talking point. So in some ways for elected officials, the bar is higher, but that's kind of what constituents and voters kind of want.
So do you expect that a lot of content you consume online might be scripted or actually done by Madeline or Liz rather than the candidate themselves?
In particular for candidates, like I'm expecting it to be somewhat scripted or like coached in some way. I mean, because I know, like obviously going to SMPA, there's a whole team behind them who is helping them with their every single move. So, you know, I expect that from them, but honestly, it depends on the creator too. Like if you're going to like a random like fashion creator, like you said, and they're having sudden like political talking points, you know, I might think, you know, maybe is it scripted, is it not scripted? I know for them, probably not, because they want to create some sort of authenticity. But yeah, like for political candidates like Jeff Jackson, like I can tell it's scripted. He's sitting down, he's in his kitchen most of the time. You know, like I know that, you know, that is written down to a T. But yeah, so.
Okay, so has this changed how you view campaigns? I mean, you've been at this for a little bit now. You've worked in a couple of different places. Is the influencer era a new way of campaigning for you?
Yeah, I think it's just, again, like the evolution of digital. It's like the next big thing, I think. So if you look at like Facebook was the big thing in like 2016. And then since then, we've seen like email take off. We've seen texting take off a lot. 2020, 2022 cycle, I think influencers is just going to be the thing of this cycle. I think it will ebb and flow and change for cycles to come, but I definitely think it's here to stay.
What do you think, Madeline? You've been in this for a while.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, my background's in advertising, much like Liz, and I just personally became very interested with creators and influencers. It felt like the next frontier of marketing, so I agree. I think this is the future. Interesting.
All right, we've got 15 minutes left. I want to turn it over to our esteemed in-person audience. Sarah has a mic. Questions? We've got some down front, which I can almost see. Who are you and what do you want to ask?
Hi. Is it on?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Alexia. I'm a second year student here. I'm double majoring in journalism and international affairs. I wanted to ask you, how do you go about pricing? Is there a certain budget that you have for each creator, or is there like a higher end or a lower end depending on how much you want them to be a part of your cause?
Getting right to the nuts and bolts. Liz, Madeline, what do you think?
Yeah, essentially all of what you just said. It depends on how big they are, whether or not they're managed, how early they are in their career, their engagement rates, how many platforms we're talking, specifically what the asset is. If it's a story post, that's going to be different than a TikTok, et cetera. So it really just depends. It also, to your point, also depends on how much we want them. Sometimes you're just willing to pay more, or if it's a quick turnaround, you usually have to pay more.
Yeah, I think we try with our influencers that we're paying them for whatever the end goal that we want the person to take that's seeing the ad, if you will. So we're paying them on if it's an engagement campaign, getting clicks, and we're going to pay them on a cost per click, or if we're trying to raise money or get people to go to like a vote website, paying them based off of those actions to incentivize, make sure incentives are aligned.
All right.
So you talked a lot about how normal people and influencers can become political operatives through this, but what about the flip side of it when Joe Biden is making Super Bowl predictions on TikTok, or other representatives are trying to do these normal things on platforms to make themselves more likable? Do you have input on that, and what does that look like?
You did Biden's TikTok summit, right?
I do not do his TikTok, no, but
No, but you
in-
did the summit.
Oh, the summit?
Yeah, the TikTok summit a year or so ago. There's a whole thing.
Oh my gosh, I don't even know what you're talking about. Maybe I did that. It's like, I don't know, it's been a long year already.
Let's get to Alex's question, if we might.
I think it's great. I work a little bit with the White House on some of their like creator efforts. I think it's fantastic that the campaign is on TikTok. The DNC joined TikTok in 2022. That was a big deal. And during the 2020 campaign, neither the DNC nor the Biden campaign were allowed to have TikTok because of the national security concerns. So it's kind of an interesting time, as you know, there is TikTok legislation currently in Congress that is also potentially banning TikTok, but I think it's important that our public officials are where eyeballs are. So I think it's great.
Thoughts, Liz?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Madeline. I think it's having them built up those platforms and engaging with their audience directly is great, and definitely something we encourage with all of our clients.
So do you guys view, I mean, you saw the Biden TikTok Super Bowl. What was your take on that, Nicholas?
I think my take is it's the same thing as anything else coming up. Like a president could give a statement during like a holiday. It's just another new way for elected officials to communicate. I don't think it really changes anything. I think for a lot of social media users, they might see like Biden talk about the Super Bowl and it's like, oh, that's funny because like he's the president and he's supposed to be serious. So in many ways, I don't think it deviates too much, but obviously with the greater conversation of a TikTok ban and with President Biden saying that he would sign it if it came to his desk, I think that changes the conversation of the platform and whether communicating it was a good idea or not.
What do you think, Sonia? I mean, the House passed, it's not a ban of TikTok, it's a ban of foreign companies owning platforms like this, just to be clear, that have to divest. But do you think it's okay or reasonable that President Biden is both taking advantage of TikTok while wanting to fundamentally change its economic model?
I don't think in this situation it's appropriate, honestly. I think like because TikTok has, and I mean that's a whole other conversation, but TikTok has become such a like powerful tool just for like my generation in particular, of finding out information and passing on information. And so for him to like use that to not pander, but kind of feels like pandering, trying to pander to like a younger generation, but also saying, well, I would take this away from you if I got the chance. That's kind of, you know, you have to pick one side. I think this is black and white in this situation, so.
Makes sense. I'm following you, so.
Hi, my name's Mariana. I'm a second-year student at SMPA. My question is about like the influencers that make political content versus the ones that don't. I get the sense that a lot of the influencers that are making political content are doing it because they care and would be doing it in one way or another, whether they're getting paid or not to. And the influencers that have the audiences that are the most valuable to reach, that maybe aren't interacting with politics in their everyday life, are the influencers that are actively choosing not to talk about politics out of fear of hurting their personal brand, fear of losing other like brand deals and monetary opportunities. So do you guys have conversations with influencers that are like actively avoiding political content, and what does that conversation look like of how to convince them that it's something that's worth doing? And also, what strategies are you guys looking to reach those audiences, that those influencers that aren't willing to talk about politics, like how are we reaching those audiences that are maybe interacting with someone that's purposely keeping it milder?
What do you think, Liz?
Yeah, I think obviously we want to work with a wide variety of influencers depending on what the client's goals are. So I think we'll definitely are talking with all those influencers and seeing, obviously, if they don't want to, there's only so much you can do to convince them to talk about politics. But there's definitely other ways that we can reach that same audience through like more traditional advertising. So it's just looking at what channels is where you're going to be able to reach your audience the most effectively, is how we view it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you can't force someone to do something they don't want to do, right? But certainly I've had conversations like trying to convince creators to get involved and trying to help them like see the value and sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes it does, sometimes it works 6 months after that conversation, right? So there's a little bit of a long game there. But I think the more creators that speak out in support of the issues that they care about, the more likely they are to influence their fellow creators too. So again, another long game.
Do you think it'll then snowball through this cycle? I mean, we're only going to be picking up steam and having more political talk over the next 6 or 8 months. Do you think you'll see more and more people influencers engaging?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we saw that in 2020 also. I think between COVID, Black Lives Matter, and then the election cycle, I think there was a feeling among the public that their creators or people they followed needed to be speaking up on those issues. So I'm hoping that we'll see some kind of maybe kind peer pressure this cycle as well.
Are you seeing that as well?
Yeah, we'll definitely see as those months we get closer to October, September, there'll be more influencers that will be interested and willing. So we'll kind of expect that and plan for that.
And you think there's a bit of a peer pressure, or all the other influencers are doing it, so it's okay, or I have to, or I'm expected to?
Yeah, I think also as it's covered in the news, and it's more, they're talking about the election every single day on the news, and it's something that's more everyone's talking about, not just the politicos in DC. It will definitely be something that we'll see more influencers opt into.
Makes sense.
Hi, my name's Niv. I'm a second-year student. I think one of the leading reservations I have with social media is how unhealthy it is for the brain. I saw my little brother over spring break, and I found out he hadn't washed his hair in 2 weeks because he read on TikTok that it would make his hair more textured, and I was like, bro, what are you doing? But back to my point, I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on how digital media can help teach people how to think, not necessarily what to think, because I think that might be a little bit healthier at least.
So I mean, this becomes an interesting question, right? It's if we're having a conversation, can an influencer influence the public to think more critically about politics, to be more like Nicholas and I'm going to bookmark, I'm going to fact check, rather than just being an influencer saying, hey, you like my brands, you love my candidate. Right? Can we use social media to improve the quality of the political conversation, not just push products or issues?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the way that the news talks about, our elections right now is really not very nuanced. I think there's a lot of incentive models there that just mean that we're kind of writing crappier news, frankly, right? It's very horse race focused. It's very, Donald Trump said this, or he's in court for Y, and really isn't talking about issues like women's rights being at stake with abortion bans and IVF bans, et cetera. So I actually think that there's a lot of really healthy conversation that we're able to have with influencers talking about these issues that aren't covered by mainstream media as much. Sonia was talking about that with maybe when you go on TikTok and you're hearing about things kind of before they're on the news, that's really common on TikTok and on social media platforms. So I think there's actually a lot of good that's happening there to
But how about improving the
different
quality of
issues.
the conversation itself, right? Not just hear the nuances of immigration or public health or something, but actually making, what I'm hearing is a better democratic conversation, so we become better critical thinkers.
Yeah, I mean, I work with a lot of creators who I think are actually deeply invested in that specific issue. I think probably because they see a lot of the comments that they get and are kind of concerned about maybe some of the comments they get, but they'll say this is what I believe, but you should do your own research, or they listen to their feedback and they address that kind of feedback. So I think there's a lot of creators that are really concerned about that too.
So Nicholas, I mean, you're one of these consumers of content that fact checks and really thinks about it. Is there a way to have social media help the political conversation get better?
I think especially during the 2000s, there have always been celebrity campaigns where they're geared towards an issue where celebrities might come together and they might talk about those things. I wouldn't say celebrities would convince me to have better political discourse, but I think, sometimes we see those things, like Gen Z for Change is, one instance where a lot of young political influencers came together and basically were sharing a lot of the same messaging together. And for that type of organized effort, it's a lot easier to get that message across. So I think if you're resorting back to that type of messaging where you're bringing all of these influencers together to sort of communicate that message, I think that can be a lot better, especially if it's a united front of this is how we should talk about politics. You know, practice better self-care. This is how we want American politics to be going forward and not the horse race mentality.
So this sounds great, Liz, but you don't get paid to run elegant, uplifting, losing campaigns, right? You get paid to elect people. How do you strike the balance between improving a democratic conversation and frankly doing your job?
Yeah, I think there's definitely, we want obviously it to be like a civil conversation and like have all of those things. So I think that's important, but then also we're performance driven and we're viewing its success just like we would any other channel. So I think making sure that, you know, the content has all those things that is, you know, authentic to the audience, all that stuff that we talked about earlier, so that we know that it will drive in a performance point of view, but it's also based off of facts, is like fact driven, and isn't just someone's, you know, opinion always, and is opinion with those facts at least to make sure that it fits those things, and it's, yeah.
Do you engage in political conversations on social media?
No, I don't, no. Because I feel the same as you do, Nicholas. Like, I feel like I have a responsibility as like being a possible journalist in the future to stay as impartial as possible. I know that's not really a thing anymore, like being unbiased. Like one of my history teachers in high school told me that it's impossible to be not biased.
So Professor Holland is in the front row taking notes on all of this. So.
Yes, so it's impossible. So but I try my best to not engage as much as possible. I mean, if something drives me that I feel really strongly about, I'll try to post something that's not as, I guess, like partisan. Like I try to post something that's more info driven, but yeah, no, most of the time.
All right, with an eye to the clock, I want to, was it 2-minute warning? 2 more questions. Over down in front of me, waiting for a long time.
Hi. Oh, okay, sorry.
Such a
Hi,
polite
my name's
crowd.
Brianna. I'm a second-year SMPA student also, and I was just wondering, when you have these influencers posting for these campaigns, you immediately open the door for like hate comments and for hate to come in. So I was just wondering, how do you kind of mitigate that and make sure that viewers aren't influenced by the comments, or they're less influenced by the comments than the actual content?
What do you think, Madeline?
That's a great question. I will say the majority of the creators I work with, honestly, they get hate no matter what they post. If you're a person online publicly, most of the comments you receive generally tend to be pretty negative, or like at least your DMs. So yes, when people post politics, they sometimes get negative comments, but it's actually like not unusual for them. But yeah, I mean, I think like creators they do get engaged in the comments. And if the content's like a right fit for them, which goes back to like the authenticity piece, we do tend to see better comments, right? I was working in 2022 and a lot of the comments were like, thank you for reminding me to vote, or like, oh my gosh, you just reminded me that I need to go register. And like, obviously that's the stuff that like makes everything worth doing for us, is seeing that like you're really making a difference.
Have you a similar experience, Liz?
Yeah, I 100% agree with Madeline. I think when we're picking like an influencer to match up with one of our clients, making sure that that audience piece matches and we know who the influencer's audience is. But obviously, if the influencer is posting a lot of political content, they're going to get negative comments either way. So it's just kind of like the nature of the channel, I would say. But we'll do what we can to match it up ahead of time to limit that.
Makes sense. Last question? We get.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Sahara. I'm a journalism student with a minor in data science. My question is kind of, I guess, the opposite of this topic. How do you think that like politicians turning into celebrities by being on social media platforms and trying to seem like normal and like part of us is having adverse effects, like not holding politicians accountable because they have like what you could say like a celebrity status, or like idolizing them?
What do you think, Liz? You want to start? You're turning, and this goes back to the point that you're trying to get your clients to become influencers. What do you think?
Yeah, I think when having we'll see now a lot of politicians have large followings on social media. They're very active there. And I think while that helps them and that helps build up relationships a lot of times with the other members of the House, obviously, I think it makes people's view of them a little bit different. I don't think that I think there's ways that we can use social media to hold them accountable, and having campaigns that are doing just that, holding them accountable. But I think it's a good way to also have them reach an audience of their voters that maybe they're not typically reaching if they're not active on social media. That also helps hold them accountable.
So if one of the people you followed, who's an influencer you follow, decided to jump into politics, would you be more or less likely to follow them? How would you respond to that?
Like I said before, like take them with a grain of salt, like it's obviously going to be suspicious, but like in this case, like this year, I do expect people to, start engaging in some sort of political conversation, just because this is going to be such a polarizing election specifically. But I definitely will follow along, but I'm definitely not going to be influenced by like what they say. But I think it's good for like pushing out information.
What do you think? Celebrities, influencers slash celebrities jumping into politics?
Yeah, I mean, we had a reality TV president, so I feel like we've already crossed that bridge. I will say I have a personal friend who I met through Creator Work, who's actually running for Senate in Utah, Caroline Gleich. She is a professional skier and just therefore kind of had an Instagram following and then also kind of monetizes it on the side. So she has like brand deals with like Cliff Bar and stuff like that. And she's running for Senate in Utah, and I think she's amazing. But first and foremost, she's an activist. She always has been. She really cares very deeply about the planet and about climate in particular. As a skier, she sees the effects of climate change every day in her sport. So, I personally am supportive of that, and people like her who, they really just want to use their platforms for good.
So it's authenticity again.
Absolutely.
Nicholas, you're the skeptical and all the good ways news viewer of all of this. What do you think about TikTok celebrities and influencers jumping into politics?
I think it really depends on like whether you're the political influencer or you're the non-political influencer. If you're a political influencer, this is the type of work that you kind of want to do. And in many ways, you're sort of translating what used to be the in-person influencer into a digital influencer, where now you're earning income or you're having a lot more trustworthiness in terms of your messaging, but on the digital side. If you're not a political influencer, there is that risk because your audience might be mixed politically, and if you take one route, you might lose some of your audience off of that. Now, if you believe strongly in those messages, that might not be so much of a problem, but especially for some that their audience might not agree with them politically, it could be pretty bad on their followings and could hurt their careers going forward.
Makes sense. Makes a fascinating conversation that I know we could be continued because I know there are more questions, but we've hit 7, and I have to give a couple of thank yous. In addition to the panel, I need to thank Amy and Shane from Campaigns and Elections and the entire team at Campaigns and Elections, who've made this an amazing series this year. Thank you, C&E. Subscribe to their stuff, go to their conferences. Jack McGuire and the GW student production staff, including Alex and the whole team at GW TV, who normally staff this, and GW's events team, who are staffing Jack Morton Auditorium today. Thank you to the team. Thank you, as always, to the incomparable and indispensable Sarah Morissette, who's standing in the back giving me the time signal. And mostly, thanks to the panel. I've learned a lot. Thank you all. Hope to see you all upstairs for pizza. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.